Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Sidipi, the father of all of His, the tri-unity face of phi pattern, time, space, and motion as readouts. Before this part begins, let us remember where we stand. We did not begin with objects. We did not begin with laws. We did not begin with observers. We began with pattern. Then we went deeper and named the primitive root of all public difference, phi. Not a thing, not a substance, not matter, not energy, not consciousness, but the primitive permission that one thing can differ from another. Then we discovered that phi is not best understood as a line with an absolute zero. It is circular. That means public reality cannot be built from absolute labels. It must be built from relations. Then we learned that the first public face of pattern is not absolute value, but difference. Then we learned that because phi is circular, local readability requires a lawful local unwrapping, a lift. And through that lift, we obtained the first local carrier of readable change, which we wrote as A equals d phi tilde. Then we learned that local pattern structure has layers. A pattern has local fingerprints that can be read to finite depth, but never exhausted completely. There is always more beneath. Now we reach one of the greatest inversions in the whole journey. Human beings have long imagined that time, space, and motion are primitive. Time is supposed to be the background river. Space is supposed to be the empty stage. Motion is supposed to be what objects do inside that stage while time passes. This feels obvious, it feels natural, it feels undeniable. But phi pattern science asks a more careful question. What if time, space, and motion are not the primitive stage at all? What if they are not the containers of reality? What if they are three readable faces of one differentiated pattern? That is the heart of this part. This chapter says, time is a readout of pattern cadence. Space is a readout of pattern texture. Motion is a readout of pattern flow. And those three are not independent substances. They are three coordinated faces of one underlying local phi pattern structure. That is the tri-unity. But here, as you requested, we will speak of it plainly. The tri-unity is time, space, and motion, not as primitive absolutes, but as three derived readouts of one differentiated pattern. This does not make them unreal, it makes them deeper. The old picture, time, space, motion as the stage. Let us start with the ordinary picture. A child throws a ball across a room. How do we usually describe it? We say, the room is space, the ticking clock is time, the moving ball is motion. That sounds straightforward. Space is where things are. Time is when things happen. Motion is the change of where things are over time. Almost all common thinking begins here. Much of ordinary science begins here too. But if we pause and look more carefully, something strange happens. What are we actually reading when we say time? What are we actually reading when we say space? What are we actually reading when we say motion? Are we directly seeing three primitive substances? Or are we already reading aspects of pattern? When we say time, we are usually noticing rhythm, interval, recurrence, order, duration, sequence. When we say space, we are usually noticing spread, arrangement, distance-like structure, extension, texture, localization. When we say motion, we are usually noticing directed change, flow, passage, transfer, displacement-like relation. In other words, what we call time, space, and motion may already be readings. And if they are readings, then perhaps they are not primitive after all. That is the crack through which the new picture enters. The great inversion. Here is the inversion as clearly as possible. Ordinary thought says, first there is time, space, and motion. Then patterns happen inside them. Five-pattern science says, first there is differentiated pattern. Then time, space, and motion become readable from it. This is a complete reversal of explanatory direction. In the ordinary view, pattern lives inside time and space. In the holophase view, time and space are ways of reading pattern. In the ordinary view, motion is primitive displacement. In the holophase view, motion is readable flow. So the framework does not deny time, space, and motion. It does something subtler and more powerful. It resituates them. It says, time is not the first thing. Space is not the first thing. Motion is not the first thing. The first thing is a differentiated local pattern structure. And from that structure, if read lawfully, there emerge three coordinated readouts: time, space, motion. That is why this part matters so much. It stops us from smuggling primitive time into the foundation. It stops us from smuggling primitive space into the foundation. It stops us from smuggling primitive motion into the foundation. Instead, it lets those categories earn their place through legibility. One pattern, three faces. Now, let us state the central idea in plain everyday language. A single pattern can be read in three ways. Read one way, it gives time. Read another way, it gives space. Read another way, it gives motion. These are not three different realities. They are three faces of one reality. Imagine a river. You can read the river as a rhythm of seasons, floods, and droughts. That is time-like. A structured channel, width, branching, shape, and spread, that is space-like. A directed current moving downstream, that is motion-like. One river, three readable faces. Or think of a melody. You can read the melody as rhythm and beat, time, arrangement of notes and intervals, space-like pattern, movement of melodic line and progression, motion-like flow. One melody, three readable faces. Or think of a heartbeat. You can read the pulse rhythm, time, the structure of spread through the heart, space, the directed pumping and circulation, motion. One living event, three readable faces. This is the simplest way to understand the triunity. Time, space, and motion are three readable faces of one pattern. Why this follows naturally from earlier parts. This part is not a random philosophical leap. It follows directly from the logic we have already built. From part 4, we know that only relational content is public. From part 6, we know every claim comes through a window. From part 7, we know the first readable content is difference. From part 8, we know local readable change begins through the lift and the first carrier, A equals d phi tilde. From part 9, we know local signatures have layer depth. Now ask, what kinds of readable aspects can this differentiated local pattern show? The answer is, it can show sequence and rhythm. It can show spread and arrangement. It can show directed relation and passage. Those are exactly the roots of what later become time, space, and motion. So the triunity is not imposed from outside. It is already latent in the first differentiation of phi. That is crucial. When the pattern first becomes locally differentiated, it is already capable of being read in three coordinated ways. The first differentiation does not produce a primitive clock, a primitive arena, and primitive little moving objects. It produces one differentiated local structure whose readable aspects later stabilize as time, space, and motion. That is the disciplined foundation. 5. Time as readout. Let us now take the three one by one, beginning with time. At the foundational layer, time is not a primitive container. Time is what becomes readable when a pattern shows lawful sequence, recurrence, interval, rhythm, pacing, and ordered transformation. Think of a drum beat. Beat, pause. Beat, pause. Beat. What do you directly read there? You read rhythm. That rhythm is more basic than any abstract philosophical idea of time. It is a patterned cadence. Or think of breathing. In, hold, out, hold. Again, what becomes readable first is not an invisible cosmic substance called time. It is patterned cadence. Or think of the moon, waxing, full, waning, dark, waxing again. Time here becomes legible through recurrence. So at the foundational level, what we call time is read as cadence. Time in higher science, clocks, durations, equations, coordinates, relativistic structures, is a later, more refined development. But beneath that refinement lies patterned cadence. That is the inversion. We do not begin with time and then notice rhythm. We begin with rhythm, and from stabilized rhythm, we build time. Time is therefore real but derived. It is a readout. Space as readout. Now take space. At the foundational layer, space is not a primitive empty arena. Space becomes readable when a pattern shows lawful spread, extension, arrangement, localization, granularity, texture, and region-like relation. Think of woven cloth. Its texture is not just a thing in space. The spread, grain, thickness, alignment, and local variation are what make its space-like readability possible. Or think of a landscape. A valley differs from a ridge. A forest differs from a plain. A river cuts through terrain. A city clusters differently from farmland. What is readable here? Spread, relation, distribution, texture. That is the root of spatial legibility. Or think of a face. You know a face by contour, spacing, relation of features, local variation, and shape. These are all texture-like readouts. So at the foundational layer, what we call space is first available as texture. Again, higher sciences refine this into geometry, coordinates, metrics, topology, and physical spatial theory. But beneath that lies the readable texture of one differentiated pattern. So we do not begin with an empty space and then add arrangement. We begin with arrangement-like pattern texture, and from that we derive what later becomes space. Space is therefore real, but derived. It is a readout. Motion as readout. Now take motion. At the foundational layer, motion is not primitive displacement of objects through a ready-made stage. Motion becomes readable when a pattern shows directed relation, passage, transfer, drift, circulation, transport, or flow. Think of a river again. The water's current is not just an object changing coordinates. What we read is directed flow. Or think of a melody. The melody moves. It rises, resolves, falls, returns. That movement is not literal physical displacement in ordinary space, but it is undeniably motion-like. Or think of a conversation. Meaning moves, attention shifts, influence passes from one voice to another. Again, directed relational flow. So at the foundational layer, what later becomes motion is first available as flow. Motion in higher science may later become velocity, trajectory, acceleration, dynamics, and all the rest. But beneath all that lies the simpler, readable pattern of flow. We do not begin with ready-made motion and then notice directed relation. We begin with directed relation, and from stabilized directed relation, we derive motion. Motion is therefore real but derived. It is a readout. Why time, space, and motion must stay together. Now comes one of the strictest ideas in this chapter. Because time, space, and motion are three readouts of one pattern, they must be compatible. They must belong together. They must recombine into one coherent underlying structure. If they do not, something has gone wrong. This is the compatibility principle. Suppose someone describes a storm. One description gives its rhythm of intensification and decay, time. Another gives its shape, spread, and distribution, space. Another gives its wind and water transport, motion. If those three descriptions truly belong to one storm pattern, they must fit. If they conflict radically, then the fault is not automatically in reality. The fault may be in the reading, wrong window, hidden assumptions, incompatible scales, undeclared transformations, smuggled interpretation. So the triunity is not just poetic, it is rigorous. It gives us a test. Do the time, space, and motion readouts recombine coherently? If yes, the reading may be lawful. If no, the reading needs repair. 9. A city as one pattern. Let us make this concrete with a city. A city has time. Morning rush, lunch lull, evening surge, late night quiet. Weekly cycles, seasonal patterns, construction rhythms, school years, festival returns. A city has space, road networks, neighborhoods, parks, crowded centers, quiet edges, bridges, markets, industrial zones, residential grids. A city has motion. Cars moving, trains arriving, pedestrians streaming, goods flowing, water systems operating, power circulating, information spreading. Now ask, are these three separate cities? No. One city pattern is being read in three ways. The daily rush depends on road layout. Road layout affects transit flow. Flow reshapes future development. Development changes the city's texture. Texture changes its rhythms. Time, space, and motion are knotted together because they are three faces of one pattern system. This is exactly what part 10 is trying to formalize. 10. The danger, projection worship. Now we must install the warning. The warning is this. Once a readout becomes useful, humans tend to worship it. We start using time successfully and begin treating time as a primitive cosmic substance. We start using a space successfully and begin treating a space as a self-standing empty box. We start using motion successfully and begin treating motion as primitive displacement beyond explanation. This is what we may call projection worship. It means mistaking a projection for the source. It means taking a readout and treating it as ontological bedrock. The framework forbids this. It does not say time, space, and motion are fake. It says they are not primitive at this foundational layer. They are lawful, powerful, indispensable readouts. but they are not the root. The root is differentiated pattern. This warning matters because without it, the whole anti-smuggling discipline collapses. Primitive time sneaks back in. Primitive space sneaks back in. Primitive motion sneaks back in. And then the framework loses its foundational honesty. Derived does not mean less real. At this point, many people make a serious mistake. They hear derived and think less real. That is wrong. A rainbow is derived from pattern relations of light, droplets, and viewpoint, but the rainbow is real. Temperature is derived from deeper underlying structure, but temperature is real. A melody is derived from relations among notes and timing, but the melody is real. Likewise, time, space, and motion can be derived and still fully real. Derived means not primitive at the foundational layer. It does not mean illusory, imaginary, or unimportant. Part 10, therefore, does not remove reality from time, space, and motion. It gives them a deeper place in the architecture of reality. It explains them rather than merely assuming them. 12. The first differentiation of phi already carries the seed. Now, let us connect this back again to the first differentiation, because this is one of the richest insights in the whole chapter. When we first locally differentiate the lifted phi and write A equals d phi tilde, we have obtained the first local carrier of readable pattern change. That carrier is not yet separately called time, space, or motion, but it already contains the seed of all three. Why? Because as soon as local differentiated pattern is readable, three things become possible. Rhythmic sequence can be read, spread-like variation can be read, directed passage can be read. That means the first differentiated echo of phi is already triunified in potential. Time, space, and motion do not appear later from nowhere. They are already latent in the first lawful readability of pattern change. This is why Part 10 feels like a revelation rather than an invention. It is simply drawing out what was already hidden inside differentiation itself. 13. Human life under the triunity. This idea is not only for cosmology or physics, it helps us understand life itself. A human life has time, habits, routines, sleep cycles, memories, anniversaries, seasons of growth, seasons of grief. A human life has a space, home, distance, environment, body, social arrangement, lived places, textures of surrounding world. A human life has motion, migration, work, speech, attention, emotional movement, social movement, learning, change. These are not separate lives. They are one life pattern read in three ways. When life loses rhythm, time feels broken. When life loses structure, space feels chaotic. When life loses directed passage, motion feels blocked. Healing often means restoring all three together. This shows that triunity is not only a theoretical architecture, it names something lived. The formal discipline of Part 10. Now let us state the formal side clearly. Part 10 installs the canonical triunity framework as cadence, space as texture, motion as flow. It also installs the triunity compatibility gate. This gate asks, are the time, space, and motion readouts being treated as coordinated faces of one pattern? Do they fit back together coherently? If not, certification is refused or the claim must be revised. This part also installs several firewalls. No primitive time smuggling, no primitive space smuggling, no motion as primitive displacement smuggling, No treating readouts as substances. No hidden jump from foundational readout to finished physics without bridge declaration. That is what keeps this chapter rigorous. 15. Refusal conditions. A claim fails at this stage if it presents time, space, and motion as independent primitive substances. It produces incompatible readouts and still pretends they belong to one certified pattern. It silently reintroduces time, space, or motion as foundational givens. It confuses later domain interpretation with foundational structure. These refusal conditions are not technical fussiness. They protect the great inversion this part has achieved. Final synthesis. We can now say the essence of part 10 in one unified way. What ordinary thought treats as primitive, time, space, and motion, phi-pattern science treats as three derived readouts of one differentiated local pattern structure. Time is how pattern becomes readable as cadence. Space is how pattern becomes readable as texture. Motion is how pattern becomes readable as flow. These are not separate substances. They are not independent containers. They are not primitive ingredients. They are three coordinated faces of one pattern. Because they are faces of one pattern, they must be compatible and recomposable. If they conflict, the reading is flawed. This does not deny time, space, or motion. It deepens them. It says they are real because pattern makes them readable. And that is the triunity. 17. Handoff to the next part. Now, a new question becomes unavoidable. If local pattern structure can be read so richly through difference, carriers, jets, and now through time, space, and motion as triunity readouts, then where does that lawful readability stop? Where does the language of pattern become undefined? Where must claims become silent? Where do boundaries, excisions, and aliasing enter? That is what comes next. Because every science becomes honest not only by saying what can be read, but also by marking where reading fails. And that is the work of Part 11. Always, peace be upon you.